Welcome to Tech Hiring 2.0, redefining your HR strategy amid Covid-19 and beyond. I'm Dominic Harvey. I work for CWJobs. CWJobs has been supplying tech talent to the UK for the last 21 years. And this is Steve Ward. Steve, do you want to talk about Universum?
Yes, thank you, Dom. Hello, everyone. I'm the UK and Ireland Director for Universum, which is one of the world's largest insights-driven employer branding and EVP consultancy. So I'll be covering a little bit of stuff today on the impact of employer brand through this period we're talking about here, the CW covering.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, so what are we up to today? Well, we're going to be looking at the UK tech market. What does it look like currently? We're also going to be looking at how people feel about the tech market and what's the confidence in the future. And then really, what's the correlation between COVID-19 and the importance of employer branding? Then over to the tech skills that are required in this current environment, or in demand in this current environment. And then looking at some tips on how to maximize your hiring process. And then we're moving on to a Q&A. Just a bit of housekeeping. We will be accepting questions through the chat function, and then we'll be answering those, myself and Steve, after the event, but obviously that's not going to be live. But if you have any tech problems, also put that through the chat function, and we'll endeavour to sort those out for you as well in the process of the presentation. So let's move on to the next slide. So the ever resilient IT market, it does show some signs of recovery. A very optimistic industry sector, but even so, it was clobbered by COVID. Nowhere got away with it. Everybody was affected by it. But as you can see, it's coming back in terms of jobs being posted, in terms of candidates, applicants on the market, applying for those roles. And if you actually look at the slide on the left-hand, sorry, the graph on the left-hand side, you'll see a heightened amount of applications compared to March, compared to the actual jobs. And that points to a relative surplus of candidates in the market at the moment. Quite an unusual situation for the IT market, but one that can be taken advantage of if you have the projects and the ability to really be looking for talent just now. And over on the right, you can see that activity and interest in CWJobs and looking for jobs advertised is steadily increasing, and that's increased again in August. So that's what it looks like at the moment. Moving over to Steve here and looking at what is this correlation we're seeing between COVID and employer branding, Steve?
Yeah, so I think we're all very, very aware of this now, but I think it's a really important landmark, if you like, in employer branding. This year has, as we can see from our survey to employer branding leaders, which was conducted back in kind of April kind of time, there was an increase, a notable increase. Well, actually after March 15th, when COVID really affected us all, an increase towards employee engagement as a big part of employer branding, of course, because our focus changed very much inward rather than outward, and that means we've seen a start of a change this year, and looking towards the way in which we communicate, being around care, well-being, enablement, and support. I think we've all seen this. We've all seen this way, and a quote that we saw regularly was how you handle the pandemic will define your employer brand going forward. So it's been quite a landmark year, and I'm going to talk a little bit as we go through a little bit later. I'll cover some points as to what we've learned and how we're going to use that really effectively going forward for employer branding communications.
Thanks, Steve. So we also had a survey of our own on CWJobs. That's what we call the Confidence Index 2020. It's the second year we've done it. Will be a yearly thing going forward. We did this in April, so really in the thick of the COVID crisis, and it's from 1,000 workers within the tech market and 500 decision makers, and it looks into how they feel about the UK's IT market. And what their vision is of the future. So what were the key findings? We can just move forward. Well, when you consider the devastating effect that COVID has had in the world, I mean, globally, it's stunning, really, and very insightful to see the confidence of this market, that 89% of people feeling confident in the future only dropped to 81%. I mean, this is historically a very, very optimistic, forward-looking market, but even that is still quite surprising. It's consistent when we look at different age groups, gender, locations. So really, the tech workforce is absolutely united in what they see as the future. Over 3/4 of respondents are confident in the state of the UK tech market in 12 months' time. So that's not just the long-term future, that's in a year's time. So, you know, really, really holding firm there. If we just go to the next slide. And the reasons for that are probably well understood by this audience. It's an amazing skill set we've got here that we've been building really from the 80s onwards. The technology, some real leaders in tech that we have here. The UK status as an IT leader globally, and there's still massive investment in the industry, particularly in startups. There's a fantastic survey done by Tech Nation, and it looks at the amount of investment in startups, and I think from memory last year the UK was 5th, but ahead of the likes of Germany and France. But we're holding our own in this arena. And obviously we've got a great history in tech, so we are confident for really, really strong reasons. When we look to the future, 7 out of 10, over 7 out of 10 said that the whole COVID thing had far from being a negative in many senses. It had actually shone a spotlight on what the tech department does. No longer is it considered the place where you go when you've forgotten your password or your laptop's melted. You know, this is increasingly vital to the running of operations, the running of day-to-day running of businesses. And that, I think, we all saw working from home, and the whole security issues, the whole infrastructure issues, the whole VPN, setting up a VPN, remote working, really, really proved what the tech departments of businesses do. And I think that most companies have been really proud of their tech departments and what they've delivered. And going forward, IT leaders, decision makers, COOs, CTOs, IT managers, I think that they're expecting to be able to demand a little bit more budget from the CFO in the conversation, which are probably beginning just now for next year, really because they've proved what they can deliver, and the kind of the benefits that really strong tech department can deliver to a business. Nevertheless, no doubting that COVID absolutely takes all of the attention. Over half said it was their biggest concern, which, when you consider the amount of headlines given to Brexit last year, that was 4 in 10. This is over 5 in 10 for COVID. So really, really impactful, no doubting that. But I think there's an element of realism from the tech community in terms of, if you look at last year, and we asked the question slightly differently last year as to, do you think your salary will decrease in the next 5 years? And 4%, I think even 4% is surprising, said that it would decrease. But when we changed that this year to in the next 12 months, 1 in 5 said they did expect their salaries to decrease in the next year. So there is an element of realism. They're not just getting all giddy and just saying everything will be fine in the future. They do know that there will be a rocky road, certainly for the next 12 months. So that's interesting to see that there is that realistic outlook, and it's not just all positive. They do realise there's going to be some pain down the line. The other really key point we brought out from this is when we asked people working in the public sector how they felt about the private sector. Historically, and this is before we were doing the confidence index, but historically, the private sector is almost like a hallowed land, the holy grail of moving from public sector into private sector. But that dipped this year. And I know it's only 8 percentile points, but it's quite interesting to see the reasons why, because when you consider what the private sector's got compared to the public sector, in very kind of stereotypical terms at least, it's more money, sometimes perceived more stability, more available roles. But so when you look at that, and the kind of tech they're using as well, is also a lot more interesting to those public sector workers. So to see that dip is quite interesting. And I think when Steve talks about his next slide, we really see the impact of COVID shifting sensibilities away from this private sector into the public sector. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, so look, the things we can see here, as before COVID actually, by all accounts, is that actually we're starting to see a shift towards public sector in any case. So the survey that we do every year, which this is a student survey actually, so this is the next generation we're looking at a little bit of people coming into the marketplace. We interviewed 40,000 students and got their feelings on what are the most attractive organisations in the UK marketplace. And one of the things that was very noticeable this year, more than any other year, is the shift away from some of the private sector, larger corporate organisations, towards public sector organisations. And it was a really stark, interesting challenge. And I guess, because of some of the social change over the last kind of 2-3 years, some of the political changes and challenges. Let's be honest, let's use banks as a great example. Banks had a real hit in our rankings this year in appreciation of attractive employers. But you also have to consider a lot of banks last year during the Brexit discussions were openly talking about the fact they were considering moving out of the UK. So if you say to the world you're going to consider moving out of the UK, your chances are you're probably going to have an effect on people's consideration to work for you, because they probably think you're not going to be here. So very an interesting thing about how PR and employer branding really affects the way people feel about your brand. But as you can see in our rankings here, the companies like the BBC, the NHS, HMRC, the police, etc., jumped up the rankings, and cumulative movements in the top 50 on the right hand side demonstrate, yeah, public sector, media, etc., was doing much better, much stronger performance in branding. So we're seeing this shift towards appreciation of public sector. So what might be those reasons? So if we move a slide forward, we'll start to see some of the characteristic changes between Generation Y and Generation Z from our research. So we ask in our survey a lot of stuff around drivers of attraction. We ask students to measure brands, companies, employers on 40 drivers of attractiveness, of employee attractiveness. And what we looked at is, what are the top 10 things that people need the most in Generation Y, and what are the top 10 things that Gen Z say they need the most? One of the things we know from Gen Y over the last kind of 10 years or so is a lot of the characteristics that are noticeable there on the right hand side on the Gen Y list are about collecting. There are things around work-life balance, people who support my development, etc. And we know this to be about gathering, collecting information, collecting experience, taking it on to the next role, using it as collateral to move your career forward from job to job to job, almost like a portfolio lifestyle, or portfolio CV is a kind of style that's been talked about. Gen Z has different signals. So Gen Z is, they're going to the workplace now. This is the first year. A lot of them are in the first year of their workplace post-university. Some of them are in the workplace pre that. And what we're seeing there, the rising factors that they are looking for are around, yes, sure, around advancement and future earnings, but they're looking more for secure employment is going up, demand for friendly work environment is going up, respect for people, and making a personal impact. So much more things that are around purpose and belonging and security, and having a personal impact in what they do, both in their work and what they are looking to achieve as a human being in the social environment. And that suggests much more of an urge towards belonging and adding value and staying in an organization. People want to be in a place of security. This next generation has probably seen this difficult passage in parents, older siblings, etc., where people have not been able to buy houses until they're 35, 40 years old, etc., not be able to create any savings. And actually, probably they're being now influenced by parents and otherwise to kind of get security. So that obviously lends itself very much to public sector places where pensions, security, our feeling of diversity and belonging is in existence, and it suits the new generation coming through. So as organizations, regardless of what talent group we're hiring, but obviously we're focusing a lot here on tech, what we need to consider when we think about our messaging and why the public sector is achieving so positively is because the story of care, security, respect, etc., is very prevalent in those organizations. We need to think about that a little in the private sector a little bit as well. So moving on and to the next slide, and some of the things that, well, yeah, actually, but this slide is very pertinent to this as well, actually, because the good news is during this period, we asked talent acquisition employer branding leaders back in April, what do you want to be remembered for after the COVID-19 pandemic has sort of dissipated slightly? And look at the kind of words that we're seeing: caring, pride, people first, safety, security, etc., etc., very human attributes. So the good news, almost as I was alluding to earlier, through this very, very difficult process, as brands and organizations, we've been learning through our employer brand to consider the well-being piece. How do we look after our people? How do we listen to our people for? How do we care for our people for more? Well, so we've been learning the skills of employer brand that relate most specifically to what Gen Z, the next generation, this new generation of workforce, is actually looking for. So there is a little bit of a perfect storm happening here for employer branding that says actually the things the next generation need, we've actually almost been preparing for very well and learning in the way in which we present employer brand and our stories as an organization over this period. So this is a very, very fascinating period, and we're equipping ourselves with the ability to attract this audience. But looking forward as well, moving on to the next slide, looking forward as well, this is probably suggesting that the way in which we present employer brand is changing. I think we all see now that the kind of examples of employer brand on the left, the aesthetics of a cool work environment with fussball tables and darts boards and breakout rooms and funky and fresh foods and all the things that we deliver and tell stories about over these last kind of 10 or more years will become less impactful, will become less the stories we need to be talking about, less the visuals we need to be sharing, and more about the stories that fit on the right-hand side, like the examples of Woolworths in Australia, rewarding all its talent for sticking with them through the pandemic, and rewarding them all with equity shares in the business. And that those stories on the right about care, support, that siege mentality of coming through something together, survivors through COVID, will be a far more strong and impactful emotion generating message than the stories on the right, which are very aesthetic. And let's be honest, we all know we're probably going to spend less time in the office in the future versus working from home. So actually, whether you've got a fussball table next to a kitchen in your office space really doesn't make any difference anymore, or have less impact on the stuff on the right, because the new generation is looking for the stories on the right. And how do we find this? We're looking into the next slide. A lot of the way in which we see employer branding, often, the outside sees it from almost like the iceberg effect. They see the tip of the iceberg, they see the external, but all the engine room of employer brand is happening under the water, inside the organization. And one of the things we are already skilled at in employer branding, it's commonly the way, is to look inside the business to find where the stories are and find whether, but now the stories have changed a little bit, and people will be more judgmental, if you like, around your employer brand. They want to know how you treated people during COVID. They want to know you're a safe harbor in the storm. They want to know you're a place that can develop their career and allow them to feel secure and safe during the course of this future. Well, let's think about the way in which we communicate our employer brand internally as well. Let's tell stories into our business rather more than just out of our business, because we need to We need to tell our employees what's going on. We need to find the stories within inside our business and build advocacy, build truth from inside the business. Those stories of people are more important than ever now, but the way that they are shared through our people, through advocacy and through demonstration of staff retention and appreciation, the very authentic stories come to the top. And that's a lot of my advice looking forward, is to think about how we communicate externally, yes, but how we communicate internally to reinforce what an organization we are with our people, and let the stories come through our people, through well-being, awareness, advocacy, because those are factors that are absolute benchmarks and hallmarks of a strong employer brand. So very people orientated. All of a sudden, employer brand would be very much care, people, respect orientated, and so be thinking about how you do that in the way in which you think about your employer brand and EVP. A lot of conversations we're having with companies about their EVP is about the evolution of their EVP and the redefinition of their EVP as they start to find a different personality inside their organization. So hopefully that's useful advice looking forward from where we are right now.
Definitely, Steve, that's really interesting. And what's coming over loud and clear is that gimmicky is not enough. It's authenticity, which people seem to be looking for. If you're, as you said, equiping ourselves with the ability to attract this audience, it's about that authenticity. Rather than football tables and slides. I'm conscious of time, so I'll just go through these slides a little bit faster. But how can you get this tech talent when the market recovers? I think that these are 6 points that everybody should have a glance at their own businesses and check that these are strong. Be sure that you're promoting a career in tech externally and internally, as Steve has pointed out. Is the message that it's an important part of your business. Make sure you're doing that, because you know the pride that people find and have in working for a department will, to a certain extent, dictate the retention that you have in that. And retention of tech talent is a very, very cost-efficient way of keeping a strong IT department. Make sure your hiring strategy is fit for purpose. Make sure your hiring strategy and pathway to get to decision makers is strong, and I'd recommend health checking that on a regular basis. Be part of the companies that are promoting the UK's tech sector, and I'll speak about that a little bit more in a couple of slides. Keep up to date with IR35. I think that may have an impact next year if they don't delay it again at the last minute. And this is the key one, I think. Develop key skills internally. There is always going to be a dearth of cybersecurity people. There is always, you're never going to absolutely hit the sweet spot on D&I unless you're doing something incredible, certainly in the next few years. But the diversity and inclusion piece is something you can shape if you start to bring in talent and shape the talent and shape the ratios internally, or bringing in apprenticeships rather. And lastly, encourage innovation within your company. Make sure that that's at the forefront. I think that's really what excites developers, changing stuff within the company, changing the day-to-day to be better all the time. And I think that really keeps them stimulated, even on side projects that they're doing. But yeah, so that's our top tips for attracting the tech talent. But a next view of what's currently in demand and what our audience think that is going to be in demand in the future. So general IT, I think that's kind of making sure that people can work remotely. Cybersecurity, make sure they can do that in a secure manner and not give away the company secrets. Cloud coding and the infrastructure that we all rely on. Looking ahead, artificial intelligence is still, I think that a couple of years ago we thought that this was going to transform the entire landscape overnight. This is taking a long time. There's so many factors involved in artificial intelligence projects, but it is certainly gaining pace. Cybersecurity is still way up there. Internet of Things a little bit further down, but that seems to be a sleeping giant, and I think that will come to the fore. And then big data, it sounds all a bit 2014 and 2015, that the actual phrasing, but that data and what we do with it, what we do with those insights, still absolutely vital, and it's going to be increasingly interesting to see how that evolves, given the sheer rate at which we can create data. So really onto the talking about supporting the UK tech industry, but also that reflecting your interest in both the tech industry and the kind of shape of your tech department. Look at really giving time for people coming back into tech, maybe after a career break. Look at enticing people to come into your tech department, maybe from different departments around the company. Really give young talent a chance if you have the capacity to do that, if you have a large order book and you can bring on apprenticeships and really shape as I mentioned earlier, shape the ratios of male to female, ethnicity, that kind of thing. That gives you a real head start. And don't forget candidates with disabilities. I mean, be those mental or physical, these can be extremely valuable candidates, particularly given the fact that if remote working is becoming the norm, then that becomes less of a concern in terms of, is your building fit for purpose for certain disabilities. And attracting both more females into the IT department and people of different ethnicity as well. In our company, we have women in TJG, and also there's the Black Network, which are supporting the relative groups really embed themselves and feel supported and backed up within the company. And externally, this is displayed by the fact we're part of Tech UK, fantastic organisation. I really recommend you taking a look at it. And Tech Talent Charter. Tech Talent Charter, members of Tech Talent Charter prove, certainly last year and the year before, that their diversity and their rate of, for example, females working in tech is higher than people who are non-members. So they're either doing something right or learning from fellow members within the Tech Talent Charter. And when you have that on your adverts, or when you're mentioning that, that's a message that you send out to potential applicants. So really important to think about these things as well. If we go to the final slide, we're now moving on to the questions and answers. If you've got any questions, please put them in chat, and Steve and I'll be delighted to engage with you and try and answer those in any more depth that we can. So there we go. That's the end of the presentation. I just want to thank everybody for their attention. Hopefully it's really useful. I think some of the stuff that Steve was coming up was absolutely fascinating, really getting under the skin and the mindset of Generation Z.